Three's the Charm by MissCHSparkles, Chapter 19. Percy watched his brother and three friends left their defence class, chatting away about their lesson. Everything looked perfectly normal. Ron appeared to be complaining about something if his hand gestures were anything to go by, while his friends were laughing. Young Harry said something, and Ron gave him a shove, making the boy laugh and say something back to Ron. "I'm being paranoid," Percy muttered to himself, rubbing his face as the trio disappeared from sight. Sure, Ron had changed, but was it really a big deal? He was acting more mature. He was doing well in class, and apart from that one incident, wasn't looking to get into trouble. So why did he get a strange feeling when he watched his younger brother? It was impossible for him to put his finger on what was wrong. He just knew that something was. He was half tempted to trail them, in case something did happen, but decided against it. He had already cut his studying short just to watch his brother come out of class, something he'd never normally have done. He didn't even bother to tail Fred and George. If they were determined to cause trouble, they would. Maybe he should just give this up. It wasn't even Halloween yet. What was the point of worrying? Best thing to do was note down anything odd in his diary, and before Christmas he could review it and see if anything was alarming. If there wasn't anything, then he could put this behind him. But if there was, well, he'd need to think about action when the time came. "I think I'm going to enjoy this," Hermione stated as she checked her book of fantastic creatures and where to find them. "Nandus are fascinating creatures." Ron made a disgruntled noise, still irritated by his creature and the fact that he'd need to draw it. Actually, not just draw and paint it, but enchant it to come alive so that it would scuttle around all over the paper. "It won't be that bad," Harry teased. "Oh, yeah?" Ron challenged. "Why don't we swap then?" "Nah, you're all right," Harry laughed as Neville came over. "Hi, what did you guys get?" he asked nervously. "Hungarian horntail," Harry said. "That's a dragon." "Really?" Neville asked. "I don't know much about dragons or other creatures." "That makes two of us," Harry laughed, and Neville managed to smile nervously. "What creature did you get, Neville?" Hermione asked encouragingly. "A mountain troll," Neville said with a sigh. Ron made a strange sound, but as Neville looked at him, he said, "Tch! My brother said we'd be wrestling a troll when we came to Hogwarts, and then it turns out we just had to try on the hat." This made Neville smile a little as he said, "I still can't believe I ran off with the hat still on. He actually asked me where we were going." They all had a little laugh at that, as Neville now said, "Are you doing your creatures right now?" "We were thinking about it," Harry said with a nod, "but we're not sure about doing it here. Bit hard to think over all this noise." "Oh," Neville said, glancing at the rest of the noisy common room with regular bangs going off. "Yeah, it is a bit noisy." "We found a nice room we were thinking of using," Hermione piped up. "It's a little hard to think in here sometimes, isn't it?" Yeah, he agreed as Ron said, "Wanna come with us?" "I can come?" the round-faced boy asked eagerly, and they nodded, making him beam. Just as they started to head towards the portrait, Parvati and Lavender now came over. They asked where they were going and what creature they got. After the trio and Neville answered, Parvati said, "I got a snake. It's called an ashwinder." "I got a fairy." Lavender sighed happily. "I can't wait to draw it." "Do you want to come with us?" Hermione invited. "We're going to a room so we can study in peace. Maybe we could all help each other." "Ooh, can we do that?" Lavender questioned, and Hermione said, "I don't see why not. I don't know about you, but I don't have much experience drawing beyond very basic lessons in primary school. I could do with a bit of help." "I didn't think you needed help from anyone," Parvati said in shock. Everyone knew Hermione was the best in their year. Hermione shrugged with a smile. The two girls looked quite eager to come now, that they knew that drawing wasn't Hermione's strong point. Hermione wasn't actually bad per se at drawing, but she couldn't put real life into it like Dean could. The other Gryffindor first years didn't appear to be around, but if Neville, Parvati and Lavender enjoyed themselves, then hopefully the word would spread. With a bit of luck, this could turn into something good, especially if first years from other houses started to come. So, where is it? Lavender questioned, and Ron said, "We'll show you." 1 month later saw the trio sitting down to breakfast in the Great Hall. The weather was starting to turn. No longer were the days long, warm and sunny. A nip was beginning to develop in the air. There was a bit more of a buzz today. Everyone was excited for the Halloween feast, especially the first years, as most had never been to one. A certain 3, however. "I thought we were never going to reach Halloween," Hermione stated as she read her morning paper. "But it's here. At last." Ron sighed in relief as he tucked into bacon and eggs. "I had some yesterday. It's the day after my sister's wedding, and oh my god, was I starving from all that dancing. Had such a brilliant time. I'll tell you guys more in the outro." Harry smiled as he ate some creamy porridge. He knew why Ron was pleased. It really was Halloween at long last, and they would be getting rid of Scabbers. He knew Ron had not enjoyed taking care of the killer, but thankfully, because of their schoolwork, Ron hadn't needed to spend much time with him. And this wouldn't have raised any suspicions with the treacherous rat. He probably expected to be half forgotten when his master went Dogwarts. As long as he was fed and kept in a safe place, the rat would have no concerns about how much time Ron spent with him. With Halloween drawing closer, Ron was getting more twitchy and anxious. He just wanted this to be over and Pettigrew in Azkaban. At least there had been a few distractions this past month, including Harry making the Gryffindor team. It was funny. Harry hadn't really planned it, and at the time it had just seemed to happen. They were having their first lesson, and this time Neville had been prevented from getting a broken wrist, but simply grabbed onto his broom. However, Neville still managed to end up shooting up way too high, and Harry and Ron had followed. Madam Hooch had allowed this, since they were clearly trying to get Neville down safely, as the plump boy was starting to panic. But just as Harry was convincing Neville that everything would be okay, there was a sudden jolt, and Neville's Remember-all had suddenly gone flying. Automatically, Harry had swung around and shot to the ground, neatly grabbing it. What happened more or less followed the original timeline, which Professor McGonagall angrily stomping onto the field and taking Harry away, only to seek out Oliver Wood and declare he had a new seeker. At first, Harry hadn't been able to work out what had happened, until he realised that Hermione had conspired against him. She hadn't told him because she had wanted his reactions to be completely natural. Well, now he had his Nimbus 2000 and he could not be happier. Training was going well, and it was a good distraction against nightmares and the occasional sightings of Cedric Diggory. Of course, some first years were rather jealous, especially Draco Malfoy, but he wasn't so confrontational this time around. Mainly because he ended up extremely confused every time he started an argument with them. He just couldn't shake them. And speaking of Draco Malfoy, I still say you're wrong. About what? Harry questioned, a little bemused as Malfoy just marched up to him and came out with that statement. About Muggleborns, Malfoy said angrily. I still think they're not as good as wizards. But they are wizards, Harry pointed out. And witches. The only real difference between them and you is that you grew up knowing you're magical. And I believe we had an agreement. Malfoy went bright pink. He was too pale to manage a red. However, he stuck his hand into his pockets and brought out some galleons, and thrust them at Harry, who took them with a smile. Before Malfoy could stalk away, Harry reminded him, Don't forget the other part of our bet. You've got to seriously consider your views. Fine, Malfoy snapped before leaving, not giving Harry a chance to say anything else. What's his problem? Ron said with a slight smirk as Harry checked out on the amount of galleons. He can't argue that a Muggleborn is one of the top 3 students of our year, Harry said cheerfully before giving his Ron some of the coins. Here, this is your share. Ron stared at them for a moment, before taking the coins and placing them carefully into his pocket. He'd have plenty of time to come to terms with Harry's bet, and had accepted it without feeling weird about it. However, after all, getting Malfoy to give them some galleons was a real victory, even though this was not the Malfoy he hated. At least, not on the same scale as the older Malfoy. "So, when are we gonna see McGonagall?" Ron questioned as Hermione absent-mindedly took the coins Harry handed her. "I thought before dinner," Harry said. "We've got Transfiguration after lunch, and it would make sense to ask her then." "Fine with me," Ron shrugged as Hermione also nodded, very intent on an article. She wanted to ensure that she was completely up to date with wizarding affairs. She really wanted to learn what kind of news was daily reported. As they ate breakfast, Ron suddenly exclaimed, "Are we learning Wingardium Levioso today, aren't we?" "Yes, we are," Hermione agreed. His statement had gotten her full attention. "Weird, isn't it?" Ron said softly, thinking about what happened the last time. "With the troll?" Harry asked, and Ron nodded, as Hermione said, "At least we know you can actually do the charm," she pointed out, making Ron laugh. "I don't know," he said mock seriously. "I might need a troll to get it right today." This made them laugh. It really was strange to think that there really wouldn't be a troll. And hopefully this Halloween wouldn't be as action-packed as the first one. "Hurry along, you three," Professor McGonagall said. She was packing away the scrolls everyone had handed her in as homework earlier. "Please, Professor, we were wondering if you could answer us something," Hermione said as they stepped forward, Ron holding his limp rat. A rat that had been stupefied. "With what, Miss Granger?" McGonagall said, looking up at them. "Is there a part of your coursework that you are having trouble with?" "It's not that, Professor," Hermione said with a shake of her head. "We were just wondering. Wizards can obviously turn themselves into animals, right?" "Only those who are animagus," McGonagall corrected, "and not many choose to become that." Hermione nodded before saying, "But how do you tell if someone is an animagus? There could be loads in the castle, and we wouldn't know." "Like Mrs. Norris," Ron offered, making it sound as though he had been arguing with Hermione about this. "Mrs. Norris is no witch in disguise," McGonagall said with amusement, just as the door to her classroom opened. "But it is very easy to tell if an animal is really a witch or wizard in disguise." "Professor," Percy of all people said as he entered the room holding a stack of books, "I was wondering if I could discuss... What are you three doing here?" "We're just asking a question," Ron said in annoyance as Percy came over. "I'll be with you shortly, Mr. Weasley," McGonagall said as she turned back to Hermione. "You see, there is a spell. You're not in trouble?" Percy couldn't help but ask, coming over to them and placing his books on a nearby desk. "No," Ron said in exasperation. "Percy, we're fine. Stop worrying so much. I just want what's best for you." Percy began before spotting the state Scabbers was in. "What's wrong with Scabbers?" "I dunno," Ron said, not noticing that McGonagall had her wand out and was demonstrating the wand movement. "I'll get him," Percy said, suddenly pulling out his wand and aiming it at Scabbers. "Percy!" Ron yelped, but was unable to stop Percy pointing his wand and saying the revival spell. As Scabbers came awake with a squeak, he happened to catch the Transfiguration Professor saying that she would demonstrate the Animagus reveal spell. In a flash, Scabbers had sunk his sharp teeth into Ron's hand, causing him to yelp and fling Scabbers into the air. But McGonagall had already been casting, and her spell still managed to hit the flying rat, who squealed shrilly in pain as a bright light engulfed him. Harry had been trying to grab him, but the flash blinded him. He automatically covered his eyes, just as an overweight, balding man landed on the floor. "Peter Pettigrew!" McGonagall yelped in shock as the watery-eyed man stared at them for a moment before turning tail and running away, transforming as he did so. "Get him!" Harry cried. They were not letting him get away now. Scabbers squeaked as Hex was thrown at it, just missing as he skidded around into the corner. The trio charged after him, leaving a gaping Percy and very stupefied Professor McGonagall, both of whom were able to move or even react. It had been said that Scabbers had probably never run so fast in his life, desperation fueling every step he took. He pelted full speed down the corridor with 3 first-years racing after him. Somehow one of the spells hit him just as he was about to dive into a mouse hole, and enlarged him so that he whacked into the hole and bounced back. "You got him!" Hermione exclaimed as Ron looked a little surprised that had worked. He'd just been firing whatever spell he could think of at his rat. "No, he's up!" Rod yelled as Scabbers, the cat-sized rat, rolled to his feet and bounded away down the corridor. There was a scream as they rounded a corner. They saw a second year holding her robes and screaming at the sight of such a large rat. They ignored her and kept running, determined to catch him before he could find a proper escape. Ron was cursing Percy for his interference. Why did he have to meddle? "Levy corpus!" Harry yelled as Scabbers started to run around another corner. Instead of hitting him, it hit a suit of armour, yanking it up by the ankle, leaving the other leg dangling oddly with the arms. Harry swore as they ran past, and could have sworn the suit of armour shook a fist at them. Oh well, they could deal with that later. "How the hell is he dodging all of this?" Ron snarled in exasperation as his jinx missed Scabbers, bouncing off the wall across 2 halls, making several portraits shriek with indignation. "I don't care, just get him!" Hermione replied sharply, almost tripping over a vase the rat had knocked over in his haste to get away. "Finally!" Harry exclaimed, panting, as they held the rat aloft. "So, what now?" Ron questioned. They were all rather out of breath and a little unsure of their next move. "Well," Hermione began, clearly trying to think of something sensible, "we could—" What's going on here?" came the rasping voice of Filch, who had managed to appear out of nowhere and quickly hurrying over to them. "Casting spells in the corridor and entrance hall? That'll be detention for the lot of you." "Oh, but Mr. Filch," Hermione said quickly, "this is Peter Pettigrew, an animagus." "Peter Pettigrew?" he repeated in surprise. He hadn't been expecting that answer. "Don't be stupid. He's dead. That Black killed him." "Who?" Harry felt honour bound to say. "Sirius Black." Filch all but spat. A right troublemaker he was. I always knew he'd come to a bad end. You can always tell. Sure you can, Harry thought, knowing that Filch believed that all troublemakers. "Anyway," Filch continued, "that ain't Pettigrew. He was blown up, so put that rat down, girl." "But Professor McGonagall—" Hermione began, but at that moment the great hall doors opened and Professors Snape and Flitwick came marching out. They stopped and stared at the rather comical sight before Snape said sulkily, "And what, may I ask, is going on here?" "Students messing around with magic," Filch said eagerly as Ron protested. "We were chasing Peter Pettigrew!" Like Filch, Snape and Flitwick stared at him before both spoke at once. "Peter Pettigrew?" "Don't be so foolish, Weasley." "Don't be so ridiculous, Weasley. What foolishness is this?" "It's true, Professor." Harry spoke up. Hermione was concentrating on keeping Scabbers in the air. "Professor McGonagall used this animagus revealing spell on Scabbers, and it turned him into a man. She called him Peter Pettigrew." "She did?" Flitwick said curiously. "Well, we can easily test that." While Snape looked extremely sceptical, Flitwick waved his wand and cast his spell over the terrified rat. The adult's expressions instantly changed as a blue light glowed from the rat that was now squeaking in pain and writhing madly. There was a flash and Hermione now levitating an oversized man who was breathlessly trembling. "Peter Pettigrew!" gasped Flitwick just as McGonagall appeared at the top of the stairs along with Percy. "Filius! Severus! You've got him!" she exclaimed, looking rather ruffled as she descended the stairs. "We have," Snape said very slowly, giving his former schoolmate a very calculated and dangerous look. Harry knew why this was. This was the man who had betrayed Lily Potter, née Evans, to Voldemort, and Snape was smart enough to put 2 and 2 together. "What's going on?" Percy demanded, his face white as he beheld the man who had formerly been his pet. "Who is this man?" "Miss Granger, I'll take over," Professor Flitwick said kindly, sure she was getting very tired holding up Pettigrew. "Thank you, Professor," she said gratefully, and he did just that, while also cancelling the enlargement charm. I can explain," Pettigrew squeaked, his eyes darting all over the place as he desperately tried to find a way to escape. "You've been pretending to be my little brother's pet," Percy said slowly. his face gaining colour at an alarming rate. You! You! We will deal with him, McGonagall said firmly, resting a hand on his shoulder before he could do something rash. Look after your brother, Percy. What? Ron began as Percy marched right over to him and pulled him into a rib-cracking hug. Hey, get off! He complained as Percy hugged him tighter than he'd ever hugged anyone. I'm so sorry, his brother whispered, making Ron frown, but Percy didn't add anything. Miss Granger, would you please fetch the headmaster? McGonagall commanded. We'll take Pettigrew into that room. She indicated to a side room, and Hermione nodded before heading into the Great Hall. Without needing to be asked, Flitwick began directing the helpless floating man into the side room, with everyone else following. Normally Percy wouldn't, but he very much wanted to know why a man had been masquerading as a pet rat for over 10 years. In fact, he felt very sick as possible reasons entered his mind. He swallowed, resisting the urge to actually be sick. He needed to be composed in front of his teachers and his brother. Who is he? Harry questioned aloud. Mr. Filch said something about a Sirius Black? Filch grunted his agreement, Mrs. Norris by his feet. I believe Professor Dumbledore would be the best at explaining that, Professor McGonagall said heavily, sitting down in an old chair to wait for her employer's arrival. But I suppose I should tell you that Peter Pettigrew was one of your father's friends at school. What? Harry asked, as Snape rummaged through his robes, before bringing out a vial of clear liquid forth. Harry instantly recognised it as Veritaserum, the truth potion. Only his potions teacher would carry such a potion around all the time with him. He's one of my dad's friends? He always did have very questionable taste in friends. Snape sneered in contempt as Pettigrew burst out. At least none of our friends were Death Eaters. Death Eaters? Harry dutifully repeated as Snape sneered again and said, Really? So you're saying Black isn't a Death Eater? Well... Pettigrew stammered just as Dumbledore entered with Hermione at his heels, creating instant silence. Peter Pettigrew, Dumbledore murmured as the mass murderer began to tremble even more. I never thought we'd ever meet again. Professor Dumbledore, Pettigrew mumbled in a stammer. I can explain, I swear. I look forward to it, Dumbledore said pleasantly, conjuring some comfy chairs and sitting himself in one. The trio, along with Percy and Flitwick, took a seat. But Snape and Filch remained standing. Carefully placing his fingertips together, Dumbledore paused before asking, Perhaps you could begin by explaining how you are an animagus. It's just something I did, Pettigrew mumbled, trying to shrug. Really? All on your own? Dumbledore said, sounding mildly surprised. Well, Pettigrew started to say, not meeting anyone's eyes. I thought it would be an interesting experiment. Very interesting, Dumbledore agreed. But I am amazed none of your friends knew about this. They might have known, Pettigrew admitted, making all the teachers' eyes widened. James Potter was very talented in transfiguration, Dumbledore said conversationally. Did he help you achieve an animagus form? Pettigrew hesitated, clearly debating on whether he should reveal one of the Marauder's greatest secrets. But self-preservation finally got the better of him. He nodded and said quickly, Yes, the three of us. James, Sirius and me. We became animagi. Not Lupin? Snape quietly scoffed, clearly trying to rile someone up, and it seemed to work as McGonagall sent him an annoyed look. My dad could turn into an animal? Harry murmured. He knew the story well enough to be aware of when to speak. He was meant to be hearing all of this for the first time. Yes, Pettigrew squeaked, pouncing on this. He could turn into a stag with big antlers. And Sirius? McGonagall asked, looking rather eager. Dog. A big black dog," Pettigrew answered, anxious to please. Dumbledore nodded slowly before saying, "I believe we shall put aside the issue of why you all decided to become animagi. What I would like to know is why you have been masquerading as a rat for 10 years. "I would very much like to know that too," Percy said hotly, gripping Ron tightly, who looked annoyed. "You were my rat for almost 5 years, and before that you were with Charlie. What have you been doing with my little brother? You sick, depraved Mr. Weasley!" McGonagall exclaimed, though she was starting to look rather suspiciously at Pettigrew, who quickly protested. "I never done anything," he cried, twisting and squirming. I've just been a normal rat. I haven't transformed in 10 years until now." "Did you watch them?" Percy demanded as Ron said hotly, "Percy, he didn't." "You can't know that," Percy said gently. "Just be quiet, Ron, and we'll get to the bottom of this." Ron grumbled, but knew it was better to be quiet so things could roll on. He couldn't help but feel rather good that Percy was showing this much concern for him. He actually wasn't sure if Percy ever knew about Pettigrew being Scabbers the first time around. Percy had left when the rest of the family had been informed, and they hadn't made up until the last moment. "But why have you been a rat for 10 years? Dumbledore persisted. "What possible reason could you have to hide?"
"I have been scared," Pettigrew gasped out, "of the Death Eaters, especially Sirius. He'd kill me if he knew I was still out there."
"But Sirius is in Azkaban," Dumbledore pointed out, looking mildly confused. "He is constantly surrounded by Dementors. He is of no threat to you."
You don't know him," Pettigrew yelped. "Once you cross him, that's it. He won't stop until you're ruined or dead."
Pointing right at Snape, he half shrieked,
"Remember when he fed Snape to Remus? That wasn't a prank. He really meant to kill him."
"Fed him to Remus?" Percy repeated in complete confusion, as the trio also tried to look confused. "Who's Remus?" Harry murmured, as Snape's expression darkened at Pettigrew's words. But all he said was, "Really?"
"Yes, oh yes, he hated you," Pettigrew said enthusiastically, seizing this potential lifeline. "He hated how you were always following us and trying to get into trouble. And he didn't like how mad you made James, because you had James's girl. She never looked at him when she was with you. Sirius wanted to get rid of you once and for all. It was the perfect plan. He'd just blame your nosiness and call it a tragic accident. He knew the headmaster would never get rid of Remus."
Harry was sure Snape must have realised Pettigrew's guilt and was probably playing along with Dumbledore. But somehow he thought the rage that the potion master was currently radiating wasn't fake. And Pettigrew wasn't finished.
"But then James went and saved you. He ruined Sirius's plan. Sirius was furious. He couldn't believe it. And I think that's when he started to resent James, for throwing his gift back in his face. And when he started going out with Lily, that made things worse."
"Indeed," Dumbledore said, the very picture of being enraptured with Pettigrew's story. "So that is why he ended up joining Voldemort and becoming a Death Eater."
"Yes!"
Pettigrew cried in relief, no doubt hoping he was being believed.
"He said he left his family, but he didn't really. I think he started reading and experimenting in the dark arts. He wanted power and recognition for his talents. So he must have gone to you-know-who. I can't imagine the things he was taught."
He gave a shudder, and beads of sweat flew everywhere, making Mrs. Norris hiss in disgust. Harry knew just how she felt. He really was a pathetic individual. "So if Sirius even suspected you were still alive, he would hunt you down and kill you?" asked the old headmaster, and when Pettigrew nodded frantically, said, "But you are a hero, Pettigrew. You stood up to Sirius and tried to protect all those muggles. You've been awarded the Order of Merlin, first class. The Ministry and I would have happily protected you, given you a new identity if necessary, in a new country."
"It wouldn't have worked," protested Pettigrew hysterically. "He would have found me. You don't know him like I do."
It would appear not, agreed Dumbledore. But I hope you understand. We cannot allow you to go on living as the Weasleys' rat. I do not think they would be happy to have you back.
Percy shook his head vigorously as Ron also shook his head. He certainly didn't want that rat back.
So, what are you gonna do with me?
Pettigrew asked, fear entering his voice.
Well, Dumbledore said pleasantly, you have told a very compelling tale, and we have no reason to disbelieve you. So I'm certain you'll understand if we take certain precautions so we can verify your story.
Precautions?
Stammered Pettigrew, eyes suddenly shooting to Snape, who is moving forward with an evil smirk.
Just a few drops of truth serum, Dumbledore said reassuringly. If everything you have told us is true, then you should have nothing to worry about.
No!
Pettigrew cried as Snape advanced.
You can't do this! I won't let you! I'm telling the truth!
Of course you are,
Snape sneered as he froze Pettigrew before pouring 3 drops into his gaping mouth. Stepping back, he unfroze him, and everyone watched as the floating man's eyes went blank and rather vacant.
What is your name?
Dumbledore asked.
Peter Pettigrew,
he replied listlessly. Dumbledore asked a few more questions and personal ones, and after Pettigrew answered them all without hesitance, got down to business.
Are you a Death Eater?
Yes, Pettigrew replied, making McGonagall exclaim under her breath. And even though she knew he must be, it was still something of a shock to hear it. Dumbledore looked very grave as he asked,
Did you betray Lily and James Potter?
Yes.
Is Sirius Black innocent of betraying them to Voldemort?
Yes.
Did you murder those 12 Muggles to frame Sirius?
Yes.
Have you been masquerading as a rat for 10 years, as the Weasley's pet?
Yes.
Would you return to Voldemort if you could?
Yes. Dumbledore paused before asking,
And are you willing to give Harry Potter to Voldemort so he would accept you back?
Yes. Harry stood there, face somewhat blank. Flitwick and McGonagall were staring at him in horror, as Percy looked like he was going to faint. Filch actually looked rather shocked by this statement, while Snape was giving Pettigrew a very cold look. Dumbledore sighed heavily before saying, You really are a cowardly excuse for a man, aren't you? Yes. Dumbledore stood up and said,
We will have to contact the Ministry at once. Minerva, could you handle that?
Of course, she said with a nod, getting up and throwing Pettigrew a highly disgusted look before sweeping from the room.
Filius, perhaps you could inform the other teachers of this?
Dumbledore asked, and the charms teacher did as asked.
Severus, I trust you can take care of Peter?
Dumbledore now said to the potions master. Of course, Headmaster, Snape said, with black eyes glittering maliciously.
Mr. Weasley,
Dumbledore said gently to Percy as Filch went to Snape's side, no doubt hoping he could help.
Why don't we adjourn to my office? And we have to discuss, and your parents will need to be informed of this.
His invitation clearly included the trio, and they dutifully followed. Despite the earlier action, they had a feeling that this had only just begun. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this one. Holy moly, that went so cool. I love how protective Percy got towards Ron the second he realised that a grown man was sleeping in his brother's bedroom every night. Not to mention his own and Charlie's. That grown man's probably seen not only him, but his siblings getting dressed. Utterly vile. Anyway, in good news, my sister got married quite recently. It was only a few days ago. Oh my god, what a time. It was so beautiful. She was glowing. And my brother-in-law, he's felt like family since the day I met him. I've always wanted a big brother, and now I have one legally, and it's just brilliant. He sent me a text saying that he's always seen me as a little sister, and I actually burst out crying. I was co-maid of honour and I felt gorgeous and everyone kept saying I looked beautiful. My best friend was there. They invited him before they even met him, and afterwards they're just like, yeah, he's a good lad, you should have him over more often. I love that. Again, like my brother-in-law, just felt like he's always been part of the group. Oh, what a time, what a time. I don't think I've ever been happier. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and albino pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.